It me. I'm not gonna say important things until you let me know how my audio's doing. But it me. Yeah. I am doing better health-wise. Like, not better. Okay. I don't know if I can make myself louder or not. Okay, you can hear? Good. Hi, Candy. Hi, Luca. Hi, Tibbs. I'm forgetting people. Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone lurking, because there's more people than this in the chat. Yeah. So, what I'm gonna talk about today is this really cool paper by Keeling called Queer OS, where I'm gonna talk about how she's talking about an alternate way to look at like queer theory in media studies and stuff. And it's super duper cool. I'll link. You don't need to have it up. I'm gonna have the stuff up. You can kind of see it in the background because I got all fancy with my OBS today. But I'll link it in chat in case anyone wants to look at it now or later watching the VOD. It's also in the description of the video. And you might be like, Allie, what are you doing talking about this on Twitch? And the answer is, if you haven't heard me talking about it, I'm doing this for class. Hello, Hannah, if you're watching this, which you will be because this is my project for your class. But yeah, we're just gonna be chatting. I'm kind of gonna do a kind of close look at 3 paragraphs from Queer OS, which is 6 pages long. But I kind of picked a few sections that I like. We're gonna go into it, talk about it. I have like links, and I'm gonna switch to different pages of different things that talk about it or things that relate to it, display it, that sort of cool jazz. But yeah, what am I forgetting? Oh yeah, the other main paper that I'm gonna be focusing on. Yes, that is very nice, Tibbs, thank you. I can talk like a real human. But the other paper I'm going to be talking about is like a kind of response to Queer OS, or I guess extension might be a better word of Queer OS, called Queer OS, a User's Manual it's by a few people, Fiona Barnett, Zach Blass, Misha Cardenas, Jacob Gaboury, Jessica Marie Johnson, and Margaret Ree, and I'll link to that as well, but again, every part of it that I'm going to directly be replying to, it's going to be on screen. We're going to be chatting about it. I don't know if there's anything else essential. I'll just link in Queer OS User's Manual for you guys. And then I guess we'll get into it. Finger guns, that's the truth. Do I ever need to say anything when I could just finger gun people all day long? I know what's up. You believe me because I did finger guns. So yeah, so let's see if I know how I set up OBS for this. Oh yeah. Ooh, OBS effects. So basically, we're gonna read it. We're gonna go into, yes, Candy, true. So here is what Kara Keeling said in one paragraph of Queer OS. Queer OS would take historical, sociocultural, conceptual phenomena that currently shape our realities in deep and profound ways, such as race, gender, class, citizenship, and ability, to name those among the most active in the United States today, to be mutually constitutive with sexuality and with media and information technologies, thereby making it impossible to think of any of them in isolation. It understands queer as naming an orientation toward various and shifting aspects of existing reality and the social norms they govern, such that it makes available pressing questions about eccentric and or unexpected relationships in, and possibly alternatives to those social norms. So, really, with this, we're looking at a huge chunk of this is basically the concept of queer OS is a discussion of intersectionality. And now is the perfect time for me to explain what she means by queer OS or queer operating system. It's basically a way to look at media studies and technology studies and even just queer studies in general. And it's another perspective on it. And it's basically, Keeling is proposing a way that we look at the world and the way we look at media that fits in with ideas of queer theory better than what we have now. And in this paper, she also discusses people who are talking about these sorts of intersectional analysis of things and uses of technology. And yeah, it's a lot about intersectionality and things. This is very fun because I cannot tell how far behind the stream is versus what I'm saying out loud. The delay is impeccable. But yeah, so I popped a little bit of stuff in the chat. If we want to talk about social norms, that's my jam. Sociology major. So I kind of really like what she says in this of understands queer as naming an orientation towards various and shifting aspects of existing reality and the social norms they govern. As seeing queer studies not as like necessarily non-normative, but the shifting of norms and the shifting of society in the way that I feel like in a way that pushes the boundaries of what our society puts forward. Yeah. See? I can be taken so seriously when I do finger guns. It's the truth. But yeah, what else? So then I'll go into another paragraph that she has in this work, which is inspired by McPherson's analysis of eunuchs in the context of U.S. racial formation, Queer OS seeks to make queer into the logic of an operating system of a larger order, which we'll go back to, that unsettles the common senses that secure those presently hegemonic social relations that can be characterized by domination, exploitation, oppression, and other violences. While it is worth noting here that my references to the commons are in critical conversation with existing formulations of the digital commons, an aim of Queer OS vis-a-vis conceptualizations of commons is to provide a society-level operating system, and perhaps an operating system that can run on computer hardware, to facilitate and support imaginative, unexpected, and ethical relations between and among living beings and the environment, even when they have little and perhaps nothing in common. So one thing that I'm going to go into kind of quickly and first in relation to this paragraph is the discussion of what Tara McPherson said about operating systems of a larger order, which is something that she wrote about in a paper on race and technology and media studies and stuff. That's not particularly like queer studies, but I kind of want to bring in and hone in on what she meant by this. So the context was her full quote, which I popped in the chat, was furthermore, Unix is widely understood to embody particular philosophies and cultures of computation, operating systems of a larger order that we will return to. So something that I kind of had to research into because I don't know that much about technologies. I am interested in media studies, not as knowledgeable about actual technologies and stuff, is the extent that, as you can see here, I'm hoping you can see here, yeah, that Unix is kind of the source and overarching thing. These are different operating systems that kind of have spun off of Unix and the source code within it. So it's kind of coming from it, but on top of it, the way she worded particular philosophies and cultures of computation, I feel like Keeling was kind of pulling the idea of an entire way of being surrounded by surrounded by like the idea of queerness and like the philosophy around pushing boundaries and understanding boundaries and not letting them hold you back, and that sort of idea that's so prevalent in queer studies and so different from the way that existing things are rooted in inequality and oppression and everything. And also, I know you're still here, and if you don't talk to me, I'll fight you later. Just saying. This is my Twitch channel, so despite this being an academic thing, I feel like I'm still allowed to friendly threaten my friends. Just a reminder. I'm just kidding. But so another thing that I kind of want to get into here is the ideas. Listen, I am. Hey Quinn. Hey Amadea. Yeah, see, I'm allowed to friendly threaten you because you're here, yet you're not talking to me. I'm allowed to feel attacked. Just saying. So I want to kind of dig into where she mentions digital commons in this. So we're gonna go look at commons and digital commons. I'll link in the pages that I'm going to, but they will be up on OBS because I know what I'm doing on OBS, definitely. So if we want to go with the general term commons, so I have this up on Wikipedia for a reason that we'll get into, but in general sociology and economics, that's very Kendi. It's kind of, it's shared resources. I really like the way that Wikipedia actually describes it, which has, characteristically, this involves a variety of informal norms and values employed for governance mechanism. Commons can also be defined as a social practice of governing a resource not by state or market, but by a community of users that self-governs the resource through institutions that it creates. I think that comes in really interestingly because this is the general commons, but if we switch over to the Wikipedia article for digital commons, we have the digital commons are a form of commons involving the distribution and communal ownership of informational resources and technology. Resources are typically designed to be used by the community by which they are created. Examples of the digital commons include wikis, open source software, and open source licensing. So clearly the debate over digital commons is much more intense when you start looking at like media studies rather than just economics and stuff. But this idea of what Keeling said about the commons in her stuff, where she says an aim of Queer OS vis-a-vis conceptualizations of commons is to provide a society-level operating system. So if we go back to the way Tara McPherson used operating system as an overarching way of understanding and sets of philosophies towards a thing, and perhaps an operating system that can run on computer hardware, to facilitate and support imaginative, unexpected, and ethical relations between and among living beings and the environment, even when they have little and perhaps nothing in common. So now I want to get into a little bit of the other article that I found super interesting that relates. So I'm going to bring this up. This is from Queer OS a User's Manual. This is all super interesting. This is just a little section of it. I'm going to come back to another section of it later as well. But the one thing I want to focus on is Queer OS demands that consensual agreements are the means by which we build new architectures of possibility and make our dreams of abundance real. By agreeing to the Queer OS terms of service, the user binds themselves in a relational network of queer kinship with and between people and systems, bodies and objects, one and another. So I find that that is really pulling back to the point here of supporting imaginative, unexpected, and ethical relations between and among living beings in the environment. So this idea that Barnett and the others bring into the imaginative Queer OS terms of service paper that they wrote really brings that to the forefront, I guess is the best way to say that. And just their understanding of a queer terms of service as a binding of kinship. Ooh, Smokebeard. Is because Unix was closed source and closely controlled that Linux was spawned, Linux's OS being so modular, sometimes specialized, as to the need a user is looking for. That's super interesting because I don't know personally a lot about like technology and technology history. So I that's why I found the emphasis that so in Tara McPherson's paper, which I have linked, so if you ever want to read later, it's on here. But she really went and she was discussing race, and I found it really interesting that Keeling decided to pull this specific statement from her, because it really is allowing for wider viewpoint or options from an OS perspective. Yeah, it's super interesting. And then I feel like Keeling is seeing Queer OS as an even further extension of this, as in this is the reason why it's a Queer OS. It's the sort of thing that's allowing for that wider viewpoint, which is super cool. And that's why Queer OS, as the way Barnett and the others were discussing it, is a thing that's very focused on consent and understanding and giving freedom to users. We're going to get into a little more with their idea of it, but since we're talking about terms of service and stuff, I figured a good example of the way they want to transform terms of service would be taking a look at known terms of service, which if you're on Twitch, you're using terms of service, and I can guarantee you all you're currently on Twitch, unless you're doing some really weird stuff and are somehow seeing this not on Twitch. Call out for me if I ever make a VOD of this and put it on my YouTube. But it's just the level of things that you can't even understand or don't have the time to understand, and the level of detail and just things that you're agreeing to, but if you don't know what you're agreeing to, is it really consensual? Are you really agreeing to it? I try to read terms of service as much as I can, and I actually have read a large chunk of Twitch's terms of service before because I'm that nerd. But even when you just get into this and the fact that it's updated, you can see the when it was last updated right here, last modified 11/13/2018. But what's the likelihood that everyone using Twitch has actually gone on and read this, and if they have read the updates or been informed of the updates, or once the big issue with terms of service is that once you agree to it, there's not, and you become a user of their site, it's very difficult to leave no matter what sorts of things they add to their terms of service, which is why people are so okay with the breaches of privacy. Yeah, legal language, definitely. Yeah. Because if we go back to Twitch, like, when I say I've read the Twitch terms of service, I mean, I've read, like, what have I specifically remember reading? Like, Twitch content, that sort of stuff. Prohibited content, I've definitely read, because they make it easier to read, because they actually want you to change what you're doing with it. But then if you go down into the disputes and the legalese, it's just not as equivalent. Like, even if you can read it, if you don't know what it means, you can't understand it, which is unfair. So yeah, that's how I really feel like facilitating and supporting ethical relations requires this certain level of consent that Barnett, well, they all talk about, but Barnett specifically emphasizes in the getting started part of Queer OS, a user's manual. So let me see. I feel like I've forgotten to add something with this part, but let's see. Oh yeah, I'm linking to the Twitch terms of service. So yeah, for example, I should probably see if I'm gonna get attacked for trademark stuff for this project. Like, I probably won't, but who knows? And then, so here's, I think, yeah, my final paragraph that I'm gonna analyze. Wow, just messed that up. Queer OS names a way of thinking and acting with, about, through, among. How dare you, Tibbs? I see you. And at times, even in spite of new media technologies and other phenomena of mediation, it insists upon forging and facilitating uncommon, irrational, imaginative, and/or unpredictable relationships between and among what currently are perceptible as living beings in the environment in the interest of creating values that facilitate just relations. Because Queer OS ideally functions to transform material relations, it is at odds with the logics embedded in the operating systems McPherson discusses. Because it seeks to undermine the relationships secured through those logics, even as, like McPherson does when she points out that she's using a computer and word processing software that shape her own intellectual work in specific ways, it acknowledges its own imbrication with and reliance on those logics, while still striving to forge new relationships and connections. So I have to say that, like, it's very interesting, the idea that we can, I don't know, as a philosophy major as well, the idea of just relations is so deep and important yet difficult, that it's extremely interesting that I guess that is the goal. It makes sense to be a goal, but it's very fascinating. especially since it speaks to not only treatment of others, but accessibility to the technology of Queer OS. If we're thinking of it as a physical technology that allows these sort of relations between people. I'm kind of just going to pull right into the way that Barnett and the others talk about what I think relates really closely to this. I'm going to read this whole section because I find it extremely fascinating. The user offers itself as victim, survivor, and creator of operating systems past. The user retains all ownership rights over the content it brings to the OS, but must disclose, in Truth and Reconciliation, where the content originated from. The OS will be liable for reconfiguring content generated by hierarchical, ontological pasts, those rooted in slavery, settler colonialism, prison, and military-industrial complexes will be targeted for special attention. The OS will be responsible for transposing such content, reordering vertical relations into horizontal, circular, reversible, retractable, prescient, and/or prophetic forms, writing code for programming that makes explicit and holds space for new forms. The user, in return, reserves the right and has absolute discretion to review the new order, demand reparation, display fragmentation, and modify future possibilities. Both the user and OS agree there will be no finite in the OS. The OS will be emergent, transformative, and not yet here. The user will be provided with all available aesthetic and synonymous options. The user may invite others to the OS or break themselves into multiple users or avatars. There will be no limit on the number of avatars available to the user, and each will retain the aforementioned right to content. The OS will invite all to play and support play in all forms. Play, in fact, will be the dialogic mechanism for transposing content and creating new forms. By offering its flesh to the OS, the user becomes one, multiple, nothing, and binds itself in a contract with the OS. The user's offer of flesh is irrevocable, non-exclusive, worldwide, perpetual, royalty-free, and sub-licensable. I mean, it's so much. It's so much, guys. It's so much. But I just feel like, oh, my bad. It's so interesting how they kind of pull these concepts, because it's a direct response to the idea of Queer OS. They pull these concepts of the idea of sort of involving yourself fully being the way, very interestingly, to have just relations, because it's everyone fully, openly acknowledging past mistakes is the sort of idea and way that we can change material relations, change the way we relate with other people, and how we can understand media studies and make the media we create and the media we make possible to create be better in itself. And just the idea of just openness, which also ties into their past piece their past part that really connected to the idea of consent, and the way that consent and autonomy yet openness are so intrinsically linked into queer studies in general, is super duper fascinating. Let's see I have another part from them, which I'm not gonna go all the way through, but I will have up on the page for a little bit. But to kind of summarize this little section of Queer OS User's Manual, they're talking about branching codes of here's a section I really like. Therefore, much like GNU Linux was derived from Unix, we might branch the code of Queer OS and create a QTOS, or even a TQOS, as some activists have begun to reverse the linguistic placement of the queer and trans identities in order to emphasize the higher incidences of violence against trans people today. I really love this idea of, like, just like Smokebeard and I were talking about a wider viewpoint and specialization for specific purposes and for users' needs, and the reason that operating systems in the past have sprung up into what we use kind of fits into this idea of queer theory in general, of the needs of trans people and the needs of other queer people and other marginalized people, or just people who have, like, I guess, lives that don't fit within what people see as the norms of society. And yeah, so I really love this one thing. So it's, the end is also nice too. This new OS must not place transgender lives in a subsumed position to queer people's lives, or leave them as a kind of hardware to be added to the I/O stack in version 2.0. Variations of the OS, Kevin says, appearing to fill a need or cover a gap left by other versions. Yeah. Actually, bringing that up, it's very interesting, the idea that it would need, like, the idea that Queer OS would need different operating systems to break off from it is very interesting, rather than automatically being something that works. But the OS is continuing to evolve as the needs change. Yeah. I guess it is fitting. Like, it hurts as someone who wants to be as much of an ally and activist for everyone that I can be now. But I guess the real lesson of that is that we're going to have to face the fact that even if we are able to meet the needs of everyone in society right now, there will be a different version of non-normativity popping up as the needs change, and they should not be left out either. If Queer OS creates new norms, those norms will also have to be challenged by movements such as queer movements. But yeah, this is what I have. This was discussion of Queer OS, and if we want to chat about Queer OS and stuff, I'm here for it. This is all the officially stuff that I've written down. But I don't know, I personally find it so super interesting, and I would love to know what y'all think if y'all are still hanging out, which I see you are, because you didn't lurk well enough. You're showing up in my chat. Well, some of you. But I don't know, I really like it. I know I need to deep dive more into, like, as someone who really enjoys media studies, I need to deep dive more into the history of media, even though I've learned a lot about the history of media. I feel like I can never know enough almost, or there's always going to be something that relates to what I care about or what I'm learning about that I don't know yet. And that's, like, annoying, of course, but also super real and super good. But yeah. What do you guys think? I'm sorry I'm coughing. It's just, I've been talking for like, I don't know, over half an hour straight, and apparently my throat doesn't love that about me. But yeah. If people who are here missed any of this and care about watching more of it, the VOD is gonna be up. It'll be up, I think it stays up for 60 days is how long VODs stay up for when you're not partnered or not affiliated. Tibbs, you're fine. The VOD will be up, and also, like, if people want to read further, like, on their own, I have all the links in, like, the VOD chat, which will be attached to it, or I stuck the links in the description, and if I missed any links that, like, you noticed that I popped into chat, but I don't have in the description of the video, let me know and I'll add that. I'll probably keep these links under, what heading do I have them under right now? I have them under media discussion sources. I'll keep those in my description until this video gets pulled from Twitch. So, yeah, it's super interesting. I honestly wish I understood the Unix Linux landscape more, but I like almost coming at it from not knowing a lot and then seeing it from like a Queer OS perspective first and then understanding how accurately the ideas reflect on like Tibbs, like legit, like ask me, like you're chill. I do not mind repeating myself. I don't know if you noticed this about me, but I love talking a lot, especially about things that I like a lot, like queer studies or media studies so here's my issue. This is not related to this at all, but I can see myself in OBS and I have you guys up next to me, but I know Kevin, I never talk about myself or anything ever. I'm so quiet. I can see myself in OBS and I keep thinking it's gonna work like a mirror, so when I go to fix my hair, I'm brushing it the wrong way because it's not a mirror, it's the way a camera looks at me. Also, while you ask that, I'm going to switch on this light and see how bad it messes up my shot because I feel like my lighting is super weird and hateful right now. Okay, that's fine. Oh yeah, my Twitch streamer problems are like definitely like exasperated by, that's not the word, whatever, like made so much worse. Okay, so computer OS design is heavily dependent on design philosophy. The fact that your statement has philosophy in it already has me excited with where you're going with this because that's my damn jam. But yeah, so I don't know, what am I thinking of? Like, I personally am really interested in, I feel like, two aspects of the concept of queer OS. Unix was built on certain. Yes, Quinn, exacerbated. I don't know words. Unix was built on certain axioms like small single-use utilities, which over like 35 years have become dogma. Yeah, so I definitely think that I don't know where you're going necessarily with this question, but since I have to talk because of delay, I'm gonna say like I feel like the idea of queer theory is definitely, or not queer theory, queer OS, um, and like the design philosophy behind like queer OS, whether as thought of as a physical, well, not physical, as an actualized operating system for computers, or as a way of looking at media studies, or as a way of interacting with other people in the world, is definitely focused on the idea of just relations and of um, the breakdown of material relations and social norms um, in a way that people who have been like especially fighting for queer rights um, have been doing for years, and I think that's kind of where it's been dogma. So the thing that I think would answer that question would be, let me see if I can find it. This is gonna be a lot of flipping through OBS, so I apologize. Would be this section of Barnett's and what is it called? No words. Queer OS, a user manual. So I am here to indulge you, Tibbs. This is my job. So I really love this part. Like, queer OS can be extended to reflect the ontologies of contemporary social formations such as queer and trans people of color, or QTPOC. Just like the idea that, like Unix transformed into Linux and the others, queer OS as a base operating system would be like the Unix of not the system's the wrong word, but I guess like the first in a line of operating systems to come from it, where as the world changes, as the needs of people, especially marginalized people, change, as more intersectional spaces and ideas are accepted and needed, queer OS can split into better operating systems that fit it better, like fit the world better, that are understanding better. And I think this really, I don't know, pulls in a, an interesting point of when you flip it around and say, what if queer OS, rather than being an operating system or even necessarily, so one thing that we talked about a lot was operating system and extending that metaphor into how we interact with people in the world. And so changing the ways we act when people have different needs, I think the metaphor of an operating system and the way that it evolves is extremely interesting, in that it does have this capability to evolve. I don't know if my words are making sense, but they're coming out of my mouth, so we have that. Yeah. And I'm trying to think. So, like, the other thing is the idea of, like, a queer OS operating system as being a way to examine media and almost set a standard for media practices, I think is also super interesting if we take the philosophy behind it and we look at current operating systems and interfaces and everything going on in the digital media sphere especially, and we ask is this promoting just relations? Is this making the world better or fairer, especially for queer people, people of color, trans people? There's one section in, let me find it, because there's one other thing. I'm not necessarily going to directly quote it, but closer to the end of Queer OS, she's kind of talking about the work that artists are doing and those promoting art and the way that people are bringing queer theory into. I wonder if perception used to be tied to an OS. So, Kevin, I feel like the reason that the idea of the OS is so important and central um, is because of kind of drawing back to the way that McPherson looked at Unix as having this overarching philosophy and view of computation, kind of like Tibbs was talking about with like the axioms that it's built upon, and the emphasis on the axioms, I guess, of queer justice and other things that queer studies and stuff find to be very important, such as I have actually stuff written down. I should check my OBS. I apologize for all the window switching that's going to happen right now. It understands queer as naming an orientation toward various and shifting aspects of existing reality and the social norms they govern, such that it makes available pressing questions about eccentric and or unexpected relationships in and possibly alternatives to social norms. I can say words. And then Queer OS seeks to make queer into the logic of an operating system of a larger order. The idea of bringing this concept of queer, how we understand queer as an orientation, as a viewpoint toward this, and making that what's very essential to the logic of an operating system, I think is why Queer OS as a concept, it's not necessarily, the way I see it, it's not necessarily, I don't know, it kind of depends on what way you're looking at it. So if you're looking at it the way that Barnett and the others that wrote a user's manual do, they're kind of viewing it as if our media had this ideal, it would be like this. I think Queer OS also kind of has this idea of, even if we're not hitting this ideal, there's the viewpoint we should be looking at it from is one that can be broad but focuses on justice in these certain things. I don't know if that makes sense because I'm kind of just talking. That's fair. That's fair, Peg. I am saying words and sometimes they mean things. It's very questionable at times. Feel free to ask me to clarify literally anything. Hello. Hello, new folks. So, I don't know if you've been lurking or if you're new to the stream today. Oh, fun. We're getting some people seeing us. That's fun. We'll take care of you in a sec. It's gonna be good. But yeah, so What we're reading is we're doing a discussion of Queer OS, which is an academic text. Yeah, that too, Kibbs. Tips. I literally cannot talk today. It's impressive. Um, it's an academic text written by Keeling, and then a secondary text that I'm also looking at, which is by Fiona Barnett, Zach Blass, Misha Cardenas, Jacob Gabori, Jessica Marie Johnson, and Margaret Ree, um, which they're kind of so what they said about their piece is, our goal is to continue to advance a theory of queerness as technological, operative, and systemic, derived from individual interests, mutual concern, and discussions that have emerged from collective presentations, virtual discussions, and queer dreams. It is to engage with the challenge of understanding queerness today as operating on and through digital media in the digital humanities. So that's kind of thing. But yeah, Tibbs pointed out it's good to use the metaphor of an OS because every interaction is managed by the OS. Super duper true. I'm actually gonna. Which one am I on? I'm on Getting Started. I'm gonna pull up. Or not. I'm gonna go back to my stream because that's what I'm doing here. If I could click on things correctly. And I'm going to pull up. So they also talk about. This is like the stuff in words. Barnett's piece doesn't necessarily. It's an extension of the stuff. Ooh. That's super interesting, Kevin. Virtualization. So what Kevin just said is, and where I am going with this is the current trend of using virtualization technologies that abstract the software use from the underlying OS. So Queer OS actually being software that modifies or overlays the perceptions of or social norms of society. That's honestly super fascinating. Yeah. I don't know, like, I do want to, like, continue to say I'm super glad you're here and knowing stuff about, y'all know stuff about operating systems and stuff, because I am on the periphery of knowing things. Can we name that my whole life after that? But that's definitely an interesting concept because it's, yeah, a modification of. So I feel like the way that Keeling or Barnett would reply to that would be that I guess in this idea, the OS isn't the society, the OS is something that is opted into, I guess would be their argument. Where you're not just opting into something that changes society, but something that orders your whole experience of the world in a society that you're already in, but changes the social order. But, like, I definitely think that if we're looking at, like, this as a perspective of rather than ideal, but instead as a useful viewpoint, that the Queer OS being software makes a ton of sense because it works in a very interesting way and concept. Yeah. That's super interesting. Especially when you kind of look at the idea that they have in here of interface, I think actually kind of fits into that. Um, while our queer impulse may be to explode this box, to lay bare its inner workings in a gesture of radical revelation, this desire to access the truth of the machine in that hardware, those circuits, these gates and switches, is rooted in a drive toward depth, essence, and resolution that is antithetical to a queer OS. As such, a more productive interface would be expansive, proliferating the relationality allowed for by the interface, its interactivity, its nature as that which is between or among, that which binds together mutually or reciprocally. I find that super interesting. And the fact that like Queer OS is based so much on switching up the way that we look at things and switching up our idea of things is like another reason why I wanted to run this on Twitch rather than on just doing an essay or running something. I wanted it to be more expansive, even though I know, especially Twitch, like we've looked at its terms of service, so we understand so many of its limitations. It kind of allows for, I think I added something in chat earlier about it. Let me find it. Maybe I didn't write it down. Oh, so there was this one part that was discussing platform. Let me find it. Because it seeks to undermine the relationships secured through those logics, even as, like McPherson does when she points out that she is using a computer and word processing software that shape her own intellectual work in specific ways. It acknowledges its own imbrication with and reliance on those logics, while still striving to forge new relationships and connections. So I think I actually think that this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Kevin, where because it seeks to undermine relationships, secure these logics. So it kind of, I don't know. There's this sort of understanding of, I think, source and where you've come from that really bring to light what you were talking about, Kevin, which is the idea that there is something underlying that we're moving on from. Like, Queer OS isn't the beginning that we're starting from. It is stuff being added upon. And I feel like I'm gonna pop again back to a different thing that they said. This also fits into, oh wait, did I move off of it? That was a great move by me. Let me move back to, so in getting started, was it getting started? I don't think it was. One moment. Okay, it was in body. So there's this idea of understanding, so must disclose in truth and reconciliation where the content originated from. I feel like something that a lot of, or like that the concept of Queer OS or the original Queer OS is kind of pulled away from is this idea of an origin that I think it wants to recognize, and it wants to recognize the things within it, but I think the one place where Queer OS is failing to recognize its predecessors is the inherent predecessors to Queer OS itself, which is super interesting because it's so much about just and honest relations between people and things, and reconfiguring content generated by hierarchical ontological pasts. It's responsible for changing it, but there's no, when we think about it just wistfully in the best way possible, we don't think of the fact that Queer OS itself, it has to transpose the way everything acts because it is itself rooted in ideas of hierarchy. Yeah, I think that's where that sentence is going to end. Okay, so I'm going to read what people are saying just in case this ends up without the chat next to it in any form. So Tibbs said, again, I may be trapped by my lack of experience with queer theory and my significantly larger experience with computer OSs, but one concept of OSs is that things get restricted to their areas of responsibility. On one hand, I think that can be virtuous in expansive and overwhelming goals like social justice and equity, but also it may rob us of holistic understanding or intersectionality by limiting us to our own worlds and lives. Am I way off base? So I think basically I'm gonna bring up the first paragraph from Keeling because I think it tends to feel like it's getting trapped in that, but here's the origins of of the 3 paragraphs I pulled from Keeling, which is her writing is a big part of the writing on Queer OS. I think she originated the term. Could be wrong, but this is fairly early on in the passage. A passage just fairly early on in her work, and it's Queer OS would take historical, sociocultural, conceptual phenomena that currently shape our realities in deep, profound ways, such as race, gender, class, citizenship, and ability, to be mutually constitutive with sexuality and with media and information technologies, thereby making it impossible to think of them in isolation. So I think that if we're to go off of directly what you're saying, I think that in this conception of Queer OS, the idea is that there's no way to view the technological area of responsibility as separate from any of these other phenomena, any of these other social norms or identities. Within Queer OS, these identities and intersectionalities are so inherently linked that becomes the responsibility of the OS, if that makes sense. And then Amadeus says, can you go through the terms of service thing again? By nature, social contracts aren't entirely transparent, and as I see it, the nature of Queer OS is that it'd be constantly evolving to justify new identities and social norms. I feel like that contradicts the idea of terms of service in relation to Queer OS, or am I envisioning it wrong? Also, thanks, Amadeus. So I'm gonna pop back to, so I'll go for, she said something about it first. So an aim of Queer OS is to provide a society-level operating system to facilitate and support imaginative, unexpected, and ethical relations between and among living beings. So that's kind of where leads into this. So I feel like getting started is really where this is in a user's manual rather than the original Queer OS. But so they kind of talk about it here. I'll read this paragraph out. Queer OS seeks to identify digital interactions, both intentional and serendipitous. No, I'm gonna skip stuff. Queer OS diverges from the digital network culture widely accepted today, in which terms of service and license agreements are quietly updated by corporations in order to limit users' rights to their own data, where agreements are to be scrolled past and clicked through, and consent is not taken seriously. Queer OS demands that consensual agreements are the means by which we build new architectures of possibility and make our dreams of abundance real. By agreeing to the Queer OS terms of service, the user binds themselves in a relational network of queer kinship with and between people and systems, bodies and objects, one and another. And then I feel like that kind of ties into the user offers itself as a victim, survivor, and creator of operating systems past. I'm trying to think. So the user in return reserves the right and has absolute discretion to review the new order, demand reparation, display fragmentation, and modify future possibilities. Both the user and OS agree there will be no finite in the OS. The OS will be emergent, transformative, and not yet here. So I think their suggestion of OS is like you have to completely offer yourself up to it, and in this form it's harder to see as a literal operating system because the idea is that you're entering into an ongoing relationship, kinship with other people, and consenting to relations between each other. And everyone has rights to content. I'm gonna flip again too. Is this like? Yeah. So it's. I think so, Quinn. I think it is the sort of agreement that it's not going to be one static thing. Offer yourself up to Queer OS. Probably not a cult. I mean, definitely a cult. Just one that's loving. Just kidding, but it's super interesting. But like I feel like okay, naturally aren't entirely transparent. So I feel like the fact of Queer OS is that it would have to be entirely transparent. And if there were such, I feel like the point where this idea of branching code comes up, so the idea of QTOS or TQOS comes up, is where the needs change so much that there isn't able to be this sort of agreement. There's still this focus on this overarching thing of just relations, but the needs of the people are different. And so in their adjustment and evolving, they branch off to better fit the needs or the new needs of the users, I think would be my best guess of the response to that one. I hope that made sense. Let me know if that made sense. Also a reminder that you're an angel. I wish mean lurkers would just be quiet to inflate our numbers. But yeah, is there anything else that people want to talk about? I'm here to talk about all the things always. Because as you know, I never stop. Never stop talking. If not, that's cool too. I just don't want to stop if people still have more questions and want to talk about things. And also, I'm obsessed with this stuff, so if you think of stuff in like 3 hours or like a week or like a month, just like message me on any social media platform ever, and we can have like a ridiculously long discussion. But yeah, I have to say, it's incredibly hard to be on camera and not do dumb hand movements on purpose just to be cheesy. I'm restraining myself very well, and I feel like I deserve credit for that. Just gonna put that out there. I could be throwing up way more peace signs than I am. So, cheers to that. Alright, if people are chill, I'm probably gonna sign off. Yeah, so this was about. Listen, sometimes you just get a finger gun, Quinn. You just gotta do it. We discussed it earlier. Like, sometimes to be taken seriously, you just have to do some finger guns, and then people know that you know what you're talking about. That's just how the world works. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else. So I guess I'll raid something. Let's see. Is there anyone online to raid? I'm gonna check because there's no point in not raiding someone when you could. Yeah. Let's see. Let's raid Frank the Pegasus. Why not? We'll raid Frank. Yeah, I'll do that. Oh, wait. Possible addition to Quiros' negotiation. Computer onuses. Comes to related to new things, it must negotiate compatibility, what and how to interact. This is a great social idea. I hecka agree. That's so true. Queer OS is honestly, like, I read it the first time and then I went to class and like most people were like very confused and I was also very confused, but I was also like, all I know is that I love this. It's so interesting and it can go so many different ways. Like, oh, it's blessed. Alright, I swear, I'm gonna leave you guys alone now. We'll raid Frank. But yeah. Bye, folks.